I'll wire it now. 2 million. Just perform for us in Arabic. The pen hovered above the check. Crystal glasses trembled in the silence. He smiled like a man buying a souvenir. She didn't look at the money. She looked at him. At the expensive watch. At the scar near his temple. He thought no one remembered. You still hate losing, Adele, she said softly. The name cut deeper than any insult. His laughter died. The investors stiffened. He had offered to purchase her language. He didn't realize she owned his. And with one forgotten name, the empire he built on silence began to crack. The clinking of crystal against fine china was the only music at Elysian, a sound as delicate and expensive as the air itself. The restaurant was a cathedral of wealth with ceilings so high they seemed to gather shadows and secrets, and tables spaced far enough apart for deals to be made and hearts to be broken in comfortable privacy. Here, fortunes were toasted with vintage Bordeaux and reputations were dissected over truffle-infused risotto. Layla Hadid moved through this world like a ghost. At 26, she wore her server's uniform, a crisp black dress, and a starched white apron like a suit of armor. It made her anonymous, invisible, a silent cog in the grand machine that catered to New York City's elite. She was good at her job. Her movements were economical and graceful. Her smile was a carefully calibrated mask of pleasant neutrality, and her memory for orders and allergies was flawless. She had to be. Her younger brother's tuition and the rent on their tiny Queen's apartment depended on the exorbitant tips earned in this gilded cage. Tonight, Table 7 was the center of the restaurant's universe, and therefore the epicenter of Layla's anxiety. It was occupied by Alistair Finch and his 3 guests. Finch wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan, the CEO of Finch Global, a ruthless private equity firm known for devouring smaller companies and liquidating their assets. His face, sharp and predatory, was a regular feature on the covers of business magazines. He had a reputation for being as brutal in his personal dealings as he was in the boardroom. Illa had served him before. He was a nightmare customer, imperious, demanding, and possessed of a cruel talent for finding the smallest flaw and magnifying it into a catastrophic failure. He would send back a steak for being 2 degrees over medium rare, complained that the ice in his water was not sufficiently crisp, and addressed the staff not by name, but with a sharp snap of his fingers or a dismissive "you." Tonight he was performing. His guests, 2 stern-faced German investors and a younger sycophantic American associate named Mark, were his audience. Finch was holding court, his voice a low, confident boom that sliced through the restaurant's gentle hush. He laughed loudly, a sound without joy, and gestured expansively with a hand that wore a watch worth more than Illa's entire life savings. "The key is to show no mercy," Finch was saying, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Sentiment is the anchor that drowns empires. You find the weakness, you press on it, and you don't stop until the whole structure collapses. Then you pick through the rubble for what's valuable." Illa approached the table, her silver tray balanced perfectly on one hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Finch, your bottle of Chateau Petrus." She presented the legendary wine with practiced reverence. Finch didn't look at her. He waved a hand. "Yes, yes, open it and be quick about it." He turned back to his guests. "It's a killer instinct. You either have it or you become someone's lunch." She uncorked the bottle with a barely audible sigh, the ritual precise and silent. She poured a small amount into his glass for tasting. He swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip. His eyes closed in a parody of sophisticated contemplation. "Possible," he declared, setting the glass down. "Pour for my guests." As Illa moved around the table, she could feel his eyes on her. It wasn't the leerous gaze she sometimes endured from other patrons. It was something colder, more analytical. It was the look of a man appraising an object, a tool. She focused on the steady stream of dark red liquid filling each glass. Her hands a rock of stability in a churning sea of unease. "You know," Finch said, his voice suddenly louder, directed at her, "I can't quite place your accent. It's exotic." Illa froze for a fraction of a second before continuing to pour. "I was born in Brooklyn, sir," she said, her voice even and flat. Finch chuckled a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, I'm sure. But your name Hadid, it's not exactly Smith or Jones, is it? It's from somewhere else." Somewhere with a lot of sand and strife, his guests shifted uncomfortably. The young associate Mark gave a weak, sycophantic laugh. Illa finished pouring the last glass and placed the bottle on the table, her back ramrod straight. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Mr. Finch?" she asked, her professional mask cemented in place. He leaned back, a malicious glint in his eye. He was a shark that had scented blood, a predator looking for a new game to play. He surveyed her from her worn but polished black shoes to the single simple silver pendant that rested at the hollow of her throat. A small, intricately carved cedar tree, a memento from her father. "Yes," he said, slowly, deliberately, turning it into a spectacle for his guests. "There is something. I have a proposition for you." The air grew thick with anticipation. Illa felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, the quiet diners at other tables sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. A drama was about to unfold, and she had been cast against her will in the starring role. Her heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs, but on the surface, she was a statue of perfect professional calm. She simply waited for the blow to fall. Alistair Finch savored the silence he had created. He was a master of the hostile takeover, and he treated every social interaction as a negotiation where he had to dominate. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the deep crimson liquid as he stared at Illa. His eyes narrowed in amusement. He was putting her on display, a specimen for his guests to observe. "You see, gentlemen," he began, addressing his table but projecting his voice for the entire dining room to hear. "In my world, everything has a price. Loyalty information, people. It's the fundamental principle of capitalism. Everyone is for sale. The only variable is the number." He placed his glass down with a decisive click. "My firm is closing a massive deal in Dubai next month. A real game-changer. And my partners there, they appreciate when we make an effort to embrace their culture. It's a sign of respect, you see." He said the word respect with a sneer, as if it were a weakness. Layla stood motionless, her tray held in front of her like a shield. She knew where this was going. The casual racism, the condescending lecture on her heritage, it was all a prelude, a way to establish his power before delivering the final humiliation. So I've been encouraging my team to learn a few phrases. "Hello, goodbye. Where is the money?" The usual pleasantries. He grinned, and his associate Mark dutifully chuckled again. The German investors remained impassive, their faces etched with a mild European disapproval. Finch's gaze locked onto Lears's. "And you, with your Brooklyn accent and your exotic name, I'm willing to bet you know more than just a few phrases. I'm willing to bet you're fluent. Am I right? I'm here to take your dinner order, sir." Illa said, her voice quiet but firm. She refused to play his game. Her refusal only spurred him on. He saw it as a challenge. "Oh, a professional. I admire that. But let's dispense with the formalities. I have a wager for you. It's very simple." He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek black checkbook and a gold fountain pen. He set them on the pristine white tablecloth with theatrical flair. The room was so quiet now that the scratch of the pen nib against paper sounded like an obscenity. He wrote quickly, his movements sharp and arrogant. When he was done, he tore the check out with a flourish and held it up between two fingers. "Here it is," he announced, his voice ringing with triumph. "A check drawn from my personal account. The amount." He paused for dramatic effect. $2 million. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Forks were frozen halfway to mouths. Conversations died. $2 million. It was an absurd, life-altering sum of money. It was a fantasy. The terms are simple. Finch continued, his eyes gleaming with a cruel light. He was enjoying this immensely. "All you have to do is serve me for the rest of the evening in Arabic. That's it. Take my order. Bring my food, pour my wine, all in your native tongue. Do that, and this check is yours. a $2 million tip. He placed the check on the edge of the table, weighting it down with a silver salt shaker. It lay there, a piece of paper that represented a new life, an escape from debt, from worry, from the crushing weight of responsibility. It was a lifeline, and it was also a collar. Illa stared at the check, her mind reeled. $2 million could change everything. Her brother Sam could go to any university he wanted free from the burden of student loans. She could buy her mother the small house with a garden she always dreamed of. She could finally stop living from paycheck to paycheck, from one exhausting double shift to the next. She could breathe. Finch saw the flicker of conflict in her eyes and mistook it for capitulation. "What's the matter?" he taunted. "Cat got your tongue? Or is it that you're not as authentic as you look? Don't tell me the girl named Hadid from Brooklyn can't speak the language." His words were a calculated series of blows. He wasn't just offering her money. He was challenging her identity, mocking her heritage, and reducing her culture to a parlor trick he could purchase for his amusement. He was telling her that her dignity, her very self, was a commodity. She looked from the check to his smug, expectant face. She saw his guests, the embarrassed Germans, the eager-to-please Mark. She saw the other diners, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They were all watching, waiting to see if the poor waitress would dance for the rich man's money. A strange calm washed over her. The frantic pounding in her chest slowed to a steady, resolute beat. The noise of the restaurant faded away, replaced by a single clear thought. She thought of her father, a professor of history who had taught her that the richest person in any room was the one who owned themselves. He had passed away 2 years ago, but his voice was as clear in her mind as if he were standing beside her. "Don't let them buy your soul, Illa. It's the one thing they can't make more of." She lifted her eyes from the check and met Alistair Finch's gaze directly. The professional mask was gone. For the first time that night, he was seeing her, not a servant, not an object, but a person, and she was about to speak. The silence in Alian had become a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering every table. Alistair Finch leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He believed he had won. He had cornered her, presented her with an impossible choice: refuse the money and prove his point that she was a fraud, or accept it and become his plaything for the evening. In his mind, it was checkmate. Illa took a slow, deliberate breath. She did not look at the $2 million check. She looked only at him, her gaze so steady and intense that Finch's smirk faltered for a moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. It was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of the deference he expected. "The offer is generous, Mr. Finch." She began, her English perfect and unaccented. $2 million is more money than I could ever imagine. It could solve every problem I have and every problem I can foresee. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But you are mistaken about a few things. First, you assume that because my name is Hadid, my culture is a costume I can put on for your entertainment. You see a heritage and assume it's a service I can provide. My father's language, the language he taught me to read and write in before he passed, is not a novelty. It carries the history of my family, the poetry of my ancestors, and the prayers of my mother. It is not for sale, not for $2 million, not for $200 million. A murmur went through the room. Finch's face began to harden, the amusement draining away, to be replaced by a hold fury. He was not used to being lectured, especially not by a waitress. And second, Illa continued, her voice gaining a sharp, precise edge. "You are mistaken about me. You think you know what you see. A poor girl easily bought, desperate enough to swallow her pride for a check." She took a small step closer to the table, her eyes never leaving his. "But what I see is also a man in a costume. A man playing a part, the powerful CEO Alistair Finch, the ruthless titan of industry. It's a very convincing performance, but the name is wrong. The suit is wrong. It doesn't fit the boy I remember." Alistair Finch froze. His entire body went rigid as if struck by lightning. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly pale mask. His eyes, which had been so full of mockery moments before, were now wide with disbelief and something else, fear. Illa leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. "The offer is generous, Mr. Finch," she repeated softly, "but I think Adele would be ashamed to hear you say that." The name landed in the silent room like a bomb. Adele. It was a name no one at that table, no one in his current life knew. It was the name of a boy from a dusty, forgotten past. A boy who lived in a modest house, whose father was not yet a monster, whose hands were not yet stained with the ruin of other people's lives. It was his real name, the name he had buried 20 years ago when his family had clawed their way to wealth and reinvention. Finch stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. The carefully constructed persona of Alistus de Finch, the invincible master of the universe, shattered into a million pieces. In its place was a terrified boy named Adele, confronted by a ghost from a life he thought he had successfully erased. "How?" he whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. "How do you know that name?" His guests stared utterly bewildered. Mark, the associate, looked back and forth between his boss's ashen face and Illa's calm, unwavering expression. The German investors exchanged a look of profound confusion. Illa simply held his gaze. She didn't need to say another word. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been completely inverted. The waitress held all the cards. The billionaire was exposed vulnerable and utterly at her mercy. The $2 million check lay forgotten on the table, a pathetic, meaningless prop in a drama that had suddenly become terrifyingly real. Without breaking eye contact with the man who was no longer Alistus de Finch, but only Adele, she said, "Now, about your dinner order? Will you be having the steak or will you be needing a moment?" The aftermath of Illa's revelation was a deafening silence. Adele, he was no longer Alistair Finch, in that moment stared at her, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and panic. The name she had spoken was a key one he thought had been melted down and discarded decades ago. Yet here was this woman, a waitress he had intended to humiliate, using it to unlock the deepest, most guarded vault of his identity. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. The walls of the restaurant, moments before a stage for his grand performance, now felt like they were closing in on him. The faces of his guests blurred into a gallery of judgment. "Get out!" he rasped, the words directed at them, but his eyes still fixed on Illa. "Alistus, are you all right, Mark?" the associate asked, his voice laced with a pathetic concern. "I said get out." "Oh, out!" Finch roared, slamming his fist on the table. The crystal glasses jumped and the wine sloshed over the rims, staining the white tablecloth like blood. The violence of the act was shocking a crack in the icy composure he so carefully maintained. The German investors, clearly unnerved, rose immediately. They gathered their things with stiff formal movements, nodding curtly before making a swift exit. Mark lingered, looking lost. "Mr. Finch, the deal. The deal is the last thing you need to worry about right now. Mark, go." Finch's voice was raw, frayed at the edges. Mark skewered away like a frightened mouse. Now they were alone at the table, surrounded by the stunned silence of the other patrons. The restaurant manager, a tall, perpetually worried man named Julian, hurried over. "Mr. Finch, is everything all right? Is there a problem with the service?" Julian asked, his eyes darting nervously toward Illa, assuming she was the cause of the outburst. Finch waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at him. "There is no problem. Leave us. I need to speak with your employee." "Sir, that's highly irregular," Julian began. "Do you know who I am?" Finch hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I could buy this restaurant and turn it into a parking garage by tomorrow morning. Now leave us alone." Julian paused and retreated, casting one last helpless glance at Illa. She gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of her head, signaling that she was okay. She was more than okay. For the first time in a long time, she was in control. Finch slumped back in his chair, the manufactured rage draining out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion. He looked older, smaller. The predatory glint in his eye was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading confusion. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you know me?" "I know a boy who loved to climb the old cedar tree in his backyard," Illa said softly, her hand unconsciously touching the small silver pendant at her neck. "A boy who shared his sandwiches with the housekeeper's daughter because he knew she didn't always have enough. A boy whose favorite book was The Count of Monte Cristo because he dreamed of adventure, not of hostile takeovers. Every word was a chisel chipping away at the marble statue of Alistair Finch to reveal the forgotten boy underneath. He stared at her pendant, his eyes widening as recognition dawned the cedar tree. He remembered it vividly. He also remembered a little girl with big dark eyes who used to watch him from her mother's kitchen window. Ila. He breathed the name tentative on his tongue. Nadia's daughter. My mother's name was Samira. She corrected him gently. And yes, I am her daughter. The last piece of his composure crumbled. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The sound of his quiet, choked sobs was more shocking than his earlier rage. The great Alistair Finch, the corporate killer, was weeping in the middle of his favorite restaurant. Ila stood watching him, not with triumph, but with a profound and weary sadness. This was the moment she had both dreaded and prayed for. Over the last 10 years, the moment of reckoning. But seeing him so utterly broken gave her no satisfaction. It only underscored the depth of the tragedy that had bound their families together and then torn them apart. "My shift ends in 30 minutes, she said, her voice reclaiming its professional tone. A small mercy to grant him a shard of his dignity back. "Meet me out back in the alley. We can't talk here." He didn't look up, but he nodded a single jerky movement of his head. Illa turned and walked away from the table, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his identity, the blood-red wine stains, and a forgotten $2 million check. She moved through the silent restaurant, her head held high. The other diners watched her go no longer with pity, but with a newfound awe and respect. The invisible waitress had just brought a giant to his knees, not with a weapon, but with a memory. The alley behind Elysian was a different world. It smelled of stale champagne, discarded food, and the gritty perfume of the city. Steam billowed from vents, and the only light came from a single caged bulb that cast long, distorted shadows. It was a place of endings, of finished meals and empty bottles. Tonight, it was a place of beginnings. Illa was leaning against the cool brick wall, her arms crossed against the autumn chill. She had changed out of her uniform and was now in jeans and a simple sweater. Without the starched apron, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but her eyes held a strength that was ageless. Alistair, or Adele, she wasn't sure what to call him now, emerged from the back door. He had composed himself, but the effort was visible. His expensive suit looked rumpled. His face was pale and drawn, and the arrogance in his posture had been replaced by a heavy, lean weight. He looked like a man who had been walking for 100 years. He stopped a few feet away from her, the space between them charged with 2 decades of unspoken history. "Samira," he said, his voice rough. "I remember her. She was kind. She used to make me rosewater lemonade." "She died 5 years ago," Illa said flatly. "The official cause was heart failure. The real cause was a broken heart. She never recovered after what your father did." The words hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. "I was just a kid, Illa. I didn't understand what was happening. My father, he called it strategic acquisition. He said your father was a poor businessman who couldn't adapt. My father, Isef Hadid, was a historian and a scholar." Illa counted her voice sharp with emotion. He owned a small publishing house that specialized in academic texts and classic literature. It wasn't a billion-dollar empire, but it was his life's work. It was a legacy. Your father, Franklin Finch, saw the land it was on prime real estate. He didn't want the business. He wanted the ground beneath it. She pushed herself off the wall and began to pace the memories pouring out of her. Now, a torrent she had held back for years. He made my father an offer, a ridiculously low one. My father refused. So, your father started playing dirty. He found a loophole in the original zoning laws. He bribed a city councilman. He filed a dozen frivolous lawsuits to bleed my father's legal funds dry. He told everyone my father was a stubborn old man standing in the way of progress. Adele looked down at the grimy pavement. I remember the arguments, the shouting. My father became a different person that year. Cold, obsessed. He became a monster, Illa corrected. The final blow was when he discovered a forgotten easement on the property. Indeed, one that gave him control over the main access road. He cut off all deliveries. No paper, no ink, no distribution. He strangled my father's business to death. We lost everything. The business, our home, which was tied to it, everything. We went from a comfortable life to nothing almost overnight. She stopped in front of him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. Do you know what that does to a man like my father? A man whose identity was built on his work, his intellect, his honor. It destroyed him. He had a stroke a year later. He spent the last 10 years of his life in a wheelchair, unable to speak, unable to write. The only thing he could do was sit by the window and stare. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Meanwhile, Franklin Finch built his glass tower on the rubble of my father's life, and he changed your name. He scrubbed away Adele, the son of a moderately successful businessman, and created Alistair Finch, the heir to a fortune built on cruelty. He didn't want any trace of the old life to remain. Adele finally looked up, his own eyes glistening. He said our old name was too ethnic, too soft. He said Finch was a predator's name. He wanted me to be a predator like him. He taught me that compassion was a liability and ruthlessness was a virtue. And you were a very good student, Illa said, the accusation soft but devastating. I had to be. He whispered, his voice cracking. I was terrified of him, of what he would do if I wasn't the son he wanted. The money, the power, it was a fortress. I built the walls so high I thought no one could ever touch the boy inside. I thought Adele was gone forever. He wasn't, Illa said. I saw him tonight. When you made that disgusting offer, it was Alistair Finch talking. But when I said your name, I saw Adele's eyes. The same frightened eyes I saw the day the Marshalses came to evict us from our home. You were watching from your window. You saw us leave with nothing but a few boxes. The memory, so clear and painful, hung between them in the cold night air. The rich CEO and the struggling waitress were gone. In their place were just a boy and a girl standing in the ruins of a garden where a cedar tree once grew, haunted by the ghosts of their fathers. The weight of Illa's words settled over Adele. The memory she had unearthed was one he had actively suppressed for 20 years. The image of her family's car pulling away. For the last time, Illa's small face pressed against the rear window, her father's slumped, defeated shoulders. He had been a boy of 12 watching from the safety of his bedroom, feeling a confusing mix of shame and relief that his own family was the one staying. I remember he admitted his voice. I wanted to run down and say something. I'm sorry. Don't go. But my father was standing right behind me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Watch closely, son. This is the difference between winning and losing. Never be on that side of the window." He sank down onto an overturned milk crate, the picture of defeat. The tailored suit designed to project power and authority now looked like a costume on a man who had forgotten his lines. That lesson became my religion. He confessed, looking up at her, his eyes pleading for an understanding he didn't deserve. Everything I did was to stay on the right side of the window. I buried Adele because Adele was weak. Adele felt things. Alistair Finch was a construct, a machine designed for one purpose: to win. When my father died, I didn't just inherit his company. I inherited his philosophy. I became him. I pushed it even further. I was more ruthless, more aggressive. I wanted to build an empire so vast that no one could ever take it away from me. And what did it cost you? Layla asked, her voice softer, now the anger replaced by a piercing clinical curiosity. Everything that mattered, he said, without hesitation. I have no real friends, only allies and enemies. I've had 2 failed marriages to women who loved the name Finch, not the man. I don't trust anyone. I wake up every morning in a penthouse overlooking the city, and I've never felt more alone. The only thing I feel is the pressure to get more, to be more, to crush the competition. It's a hunger that never stops. He gestured vaguely back toward the restaurant. Tonight, that whole disgusting spectacle, it wasn't even about you. Not really. It was about them. He pointed to his departed guests. The Germans, their old money, skeptical of my methods. I was showing them I was a man who wasn't afraid to break the rules, a man who believed everything was a transaction. I was performing the part of Alistair Finch for them. I picked you because you looked like you had a story, and I thought I could buy it for a few laughs. He shook his head, a bitter, self-deprecating smile on his face. Turns out your story was my story all along. Ela listened, absorbing his confession. The rage that had fueled her for so long was slowly dissolving, leaving behind a vast aching emptiness. She had wanted him to feel the pain her family had felt, and he did. But his pain wasn't the sharp, righteous agony of injustice. It was the dull, chronic rot of a man who had sold his own soul and was only just now realizing he couldn't buy it back. "Why did you come to work here?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Atlee, you had to know I came here." "I didn't," she admitted. "Not at first. I needed a job with good tips to put my brother through college. I've been here for over a year. I saw you for the first time about 6 months ago. I almost quit on the spot. Why didn't you?" "Because quitting felt like running away," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "My parents, they never got their day in court. They never got an apology. They just got erased. I couldn't stop what happened to them, but I promised myself I wouldn't let their story be forgotten. I stayed because I felt that someday I would have a chance to what I didn't know, to make you see us. To make you say our names, Yusuf and Samira Hadid, not just collateral damage in one of your father's deals." She looked at him, the man who was both the ghost of her childhood and the architect of her hardship. "I never planned for tonight. I never thought I would say your name, but when you put that check on the table when you tried to buy my father's memory from me, Alistair Finch disappeared, and all I could see was Adele. The boy who knew what his father was doing was wrong." Adele stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked over to a grimy puddle on the asphalt and stared at his reflection, but it was too distorted to make out any features. "He is still here," Adele said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "Trapped for 20 years. He turned back to Ila. "What you did in there tonight, you didn't just humiliate me. You set me free. You shattered the cage." But now he looked around the dark alley as if seeing the world for the first time. "I don't know what to do." The cold alley air seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant wail of a swan and the low hum of the city. Ila watched Adele, a man stripped bare of his defenses, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: empathy. He was a monster of his father's creation, but a creation nonetheless. "You start by making it right," she said, her voice even. It wasn't a demand, but a simple statement of fact, the first step on a long, uncharted road. Adele nodded slowly, the idea taking root. Making it right. Yes. He seemed to be wrestling with a lifetime of ingrained philosophy, the cold calculus of profit and loss, battling this new, unfamiliar urge for atonement. "This isn't about the $2 million," Layla stated, heading off his first most obvious thought. "You can't put a price on what was lost. You can't write a check and erase the suffering, the humiliation, the years my father spent in silence." "I know," he said quickly. "I understand that money is it's the only tool I know how to use." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time. "But it can build things too, not just tear them down." He began to pace again, but this time it wasn't the agitated movement of a cornered animal. It was the kinetic energy of a powerful mind searching for a new solution, a different kind of deal. The CEO was re-emerging, but with a new objective. "Your father's publishing house," he said, stopping to face her. "The building is still there. My father built his tower next to it, but he kept the original structure. He used it for storage, a monument to his first great victory. It's still owned by Finch Global. He looked at her, a new light in his eyes. I'll give it back to you. The building, the land, everything. The deed transferred to your name. No, not just you. To the Hadid family. Illa was taken aback just like that. It's the first step, he said. It's restitution, not a payment, but a return of stolen property. He paused. And that's not all. The damage my father's company did. It wasn't just to your family. I know for a fact there were others. Small businesses, families he crushed on his way up. Their stories were just like yours, but no one ever listened. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He was no longer hesitant or broken. He was a man with a purpose. I'm going to create a foundation, he declared. The Hadid Justice Fund. Its purpose will be to investigate and compensate the families who were verifiably ruined by Franklin Finch's predatory practices. I'll provide the initial funding, $100 million, and I'll turn over all of my father's old records. We'll hire the best lawyers not to defend our actions, but to find our victims. He looked up from his phone. And I want you to run it. You and your brother, if he's willing, you will have complete autonomy. Your mission will be to undo the damage my family did. To use the Finch fortune to heal the wounds it created. Illa was speechless. This was more than an apology. It was a complete reversal, a rewriting of history. It was justice on a scale she had never dared to imagine. Why, she finally managed to ask. Why would you do all this? Adele put his phone away and met her gaze. The last vestiges of Alistair Finch seemed to melt away, leaving the earnest, sober face of a man finally ready to face his own reflection. Because you were right, he said. Adele would be ashamed. For 20 years I've been living as my father's son. From this day forward, I want to try living as Samira and Isef Hadid's friend again. And maybe one day, I can earn the right to be called that. He extended a hand, not for a handshake, not as a deal maker, but as a simple human gesture of peace. Isla looked at his outstretched hand, the same hand that had signed the insulting check just an hour before. She thought of her father's silence, her mother's sorrow, her own years of quiet, burning anger, and she realized that anger had been a shield. To let it go was to be vulnerable again, but it was also the only way to move forward. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm, but gentle. In the grimy, forgotten alley, under the dim, buzzing light, two broken histories connected not to erase the past, but to finally start building a different future. The debt would never be fully repaid, but for the first time, the payments had begun. Dawn broke over New York City, its pale light filtering through the blinds of Illa's small Queens apartment. Sleep had been a fleeting, restless thing. She sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in her hands, the events of the previous night playing over and over in her mind, like a fever dream. The clinking crystal of Elysian, the mocking cruelty in Alistair Finch's eyes, the impossible weight of a $2 million check, the seismic shift when she uttered a single name, Adele. Her younger brother Sam emerged from his room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He was 20, a brilliant economics student at NYU, and the sole reason Illa pushed through every exhausting double shift. He saw the look on her face and was instantly alert. Illa, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. She gave a small, weary smile. I have, in a way. The ghost of a boy I used to know. She told him everything, every humiliating detail of the offer, every painful memory it dredged up, and the stunning world confession in the alleyway. Sam listened in stunned silence, his expression shifting from protective fury to utter disbelief. Finch! Alistair, Finch is Adele from next door. He finally whispered, sinking into the chair opposite her. The man whose father destroyed our family. And he's what giving it all back. He wants to try. Lila said, her voice laced with a caution that felt necessary. He's promising the old publishing house a foundation. This has to be a trick. Layla Sam said, the pragmatist in him taking over. Men like that don't have epiphies. They have strategies. This is damage control. He humiliated you in a room full of powerful people. Maybe one of them recorded it. He's getting ahead of a scandal." "I don't think so," she said, shaking her head. "I saw him, Sam. When I said his name, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. This wasn't a Lister Finch making a business decision. This was Adele trying to find his way home, even if it's real." Sam argued, leaning forward. "Do you have any idea what you're up against running a $100 million foundation? The legal battles, the press, they'll tear you apart. They'll paint you as an extortionist, a gold digger who manipulated a billionaire." "Then let them," Illa said, a new unfamiliar steel in her voice. "For 10 years, our family was a ghost story, a footnote in the Finch Empire's origin myth. Now, we have a voice. I don't care if they call me a villain, as long as they hear the truth." Across the city, in a sterile penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home, Adele stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, watching the sun glint off the distant glass tower his father had built. He hadn't slept at all. After leaving the alley, he had gone to his office and pulled every file, every digital record related to his father's early acquisitions. The reality was even uglier than Illa's story. Dozens of families, dozens of small businesses, all crushed under the same ruthless ambition. It was a legacy of ruin. His phone buzzed. The caller ID read Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the COO of Finch Global, a man who had been Franklin Finch's loyal shadow for 30 years. He was a creature of pure, undiluted corporate law. A shark who had helped Franklin draft the very predatory contracts that had destroyed the Hadids. Alistista Marcus's voice was a low, growly purr. "I trust you've recovered from your episode last night. Your German friends were quite concerned. They felt your behavior was erratic." "My name is Adele," he said, the words feeling both strange and liberating. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I see. Is this some new negotiating tactic? Because if it is, I advise against it. It sounds weak." "It's not a tactic, Marcus. It's a correction," Adele said, his voice cold and firm. "And there are going to be a few more corrections. I want our legal team to draft a deed transfer for the property at 417 West Chelsea. It's to be transferred as a gift to the Hadid family. Then I want them to begin setting up a charitable foundation. The initial endowment will be $100 million from my personal holdings." The silence that followed was so profound, Adele thought the line might have gone dead. When Marcus finally spoke, the purr was gone, replaced by the hiss of a cornered snake. "Have you lost your mind? That property is a key asset in the Chelsea redevelopment plan, and $100 million the board will never approve it. They will see it as a gross misuse of your position. They'll see you as unfit to lead. It's not coming from the company," Adele clarified. "It's coming from me, and I'm not asking the board's permission. I'm informing you of a decision. As for the property, consider the redevelopment plan cancelled. Alistista Adele, whoever you are." Marcus snarled. "Your father built this company on a simple principle forward. Always never look back. Never apologize, never pay. You are about to betray everything he worked for based on a sentimental whim involving a waitress. That sentimental whim is called justice, Marcus, a concept I know you and my father found inconvenient. Have the papers drawn up. I'm meeting with Monsieur Hadid this afternoon to see the property." He hung up before Marcus could reply the finality of the act, sending a tremor through him. The first shot had been fired. The war for the soul of Finch Global and his own had just begun. The old Hadid publishing house was a ghost. Squeezed between two gleaming modern structures, the three-story brick building was a relic of a different time. Dust covered everything, and the air was thick with the smell of decaying paper and forgotten ink. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating dancing mows of dust in the cavernous main room where the printing presses once stood. Illa walked through the space, running her hand along a dusty bookshelf. She could almost hear the echoes of the past, her father's booming laugh, the rhythmic clatter of the machines, the scent of hot coffee, and new books. The front door creaked open and Adele walked in. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and slacks, the power's suit and its armor stripped away. He looked at Illa then, around the derelict space. "My father never touched a thing," he said quietly. "He just locked the doors. I think in his own twisted way, he saw it as his greatest trophy. It was my home." Illa replied, her voice soft, but not accusatory. He nodded, accepting the weight of her words. He was holding a leather portfolio. "These are the preliminary documents from my lawyers, the deed transfer, and the initial charter for the foundation. I wanted you to have them to know this is real." She took the portfolio, its weight, a tangible symbol of his intent. As she opened it, the front door swung open again, more forcefully this time. Marcus Thorne stood there, flanked by two younger men in identical dark suits. He was in his late 60s, with a face like a clenched fist and eyes as cold and grey as a winter sky. He surveyed the scene with undisguised contempt. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A trip down memory lane? How touching." He strode into the room, his expensive shoes crunching on fallen plaster. He ignored Illa completely, his focus entirely on Adele. "Alistair, this madness has to stop." Marcus said, "The board is in an uproar. I've had to spend all morning convincing them not to call an emergency meeting to discuss your immediate removal. This building is worth $50 million as part of the Chelsea deal. You can't just give it away. It was never ours to begin with." Marcus, Adele said calmly. "It was stolen. We are returning it." Marcus finally deigned to look at Illa, his gaze dismissive and insulting. "And you are the person responsible for this delusion, Ms. Hadid. Is it, let me explain how the world works. Men like him," he gestured to Adele, "do not give away fortunes because of a guilty conscience, a check, perhaps a non-disclosure agreement. But not this. Whatever you think you've accomplished, I assure you, it will not stand. We will fight this. We will fight you in the boardroom and in the press. By the time we're done, your family's name will be synonymous with fraud and extortion." Illa met his gaze without flinching. The fear she might have felt a day ago was gone, burned away by a cold, clear purpose. "You're wrong, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You think this is about money? You think you can fight us with lawyers and smear campaigns, but this is about a debt that has nothing to do with dollars and cents. It's a moral debt, and it has come due." She held up the portfolio. "This isn't a gift, it's a confession. It's the truth written on paper, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows it. You can fight me in the boardroom. You can fight me in the press, but you'll be fighting on the wrong side of history, just like Franklin Finch." Marcus stared at her, momentarily silenced by her defiance. He had expected a timid, overwhelmed waitress. He found a queen defending her birthright. He turned to Adele, a final plea, mixed with a threat. "Don't do this, son. Don't throw away your father's legacy." "I'm not," Adele said, stepping to stand beside Illa, a united front. "I'm finally redeeming it." In the end, it wasn't the $2 million that changed everything. It was a single name spoken in a quiet restaurant that unearthed a buried past and changed the course of two lives. Layla Hadid didn't get a tip that night. She got justice. She regained her family's legacy and was given the power to restore the honor of so many others. And Alistair Finch, the ruthless CEO, died in that alley, making way for Adele to begin the long, difficult journey of atonement. This story reminds us that beneath the suits and the titles behind the power and the poverty, we are all just people carrying the stories of our past. It shows that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak the truth to power, even when your voice shakes. If this story moved you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who needs to hear that courage can be quieter and stronger than any amount of money. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that challenge our world and inspire the heart. Click that notification bell so you never miss a video. Thank you for listening.